Hello to all of my friends at Stevivor.com. It's me, Mario. You guys, number one.
Hey listeners, it's Eleni Thomas here, coming to you from Stevivor, and we've got a very special edition of the Friendly Fire show for you guys today. Yes, that's right, we have Dhayana, aka MissDeusGeek, on the show, and I had a great opportunity to chat with her all things video games, particularly looking at women in games, things like representation, and what else can be done to make sure that the gaming industry is reflecting those who are playing the games. So without further ado, check out our fantastic chat. Alrighty, well, Dhayana, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. Really excited to chat all things games and particularly look at women in games. So I thought it'd be great to start off just by getting a bit of background on you, your sort of role in the gaming community, and one thing I love to chat about with women in games particularly is how did you even get into games? I know for me personally, I attribute it all to my older brother. I don't think I would have been the games fanatic I am without having an older brother and, you know, sneaking away to play on his PlayStation 1 when he wasn't looking. So yeah, tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, I essentially am a doer of many things and aware of many hats when it comes to games. I run a blog or a website where I review games. I'm a streamer and a content creator. I'm a social media influencer. And now, most recently, I'm essentially an advocate for diversity and inclusivity in games. So I do work a lot with brands and communities to try and encourage more inclusion and accessibility when it comes to games. And so, yeah, things like this, talking about women in games is super amazing, because I think we need to have, you know, more focus on girls gaming, and that there are a lot of women in games and representation matters. So yeah, just do all sorts when it comes to games. I don't just play games. I play games badly, though. I have to preface it with that. I am terrible and I'm an absolute noob when it comes to playing games. But I do everything else outside as well.
Lovely. And yeah, as you sort of touched on, something I really admire about you and love is how you really are an advocate for women in games. You do a lot of great work, and I'd love to sort of highlight your non-for-profit community group, Women of Xbox, and I'd love to sort of hear you talk about that a bit more, and particularly look at, I guess, the importance of having safe spaces for women to be able to really come together in the gaming community as well.
Yeah, so Women of Xbox really was almost a turning point in my career in games. I started seeing a lot of disparity between, you know, who's gaming, who's feeling comfortable as a gamer publicly. I worked with a lot of women and young girls when I was kind of teaching, streaming one-on-one classes and trying to get more girls feeling comfortable playing games, as well as looking at games as a viable career path. So I started to hear a lot of conversations of women saying, you know, they hide their personas when they play publicly, when they play online. Some of them even use voice changers so that no one will know that they're, you know, a girl or a female. And there were a lot of harassment and abuse when it comes to, you know, females playing games online. I myself have had that, where I, you know, used to play games online and would have guys come into the chat and just, you know, ultimately assume that I must be bad. I mean, I am, granted, I am, but they assumed it right off the bat. And, you know, it was constant name calling, telling me that I couldn't ever play competitive because of gender. And that's conversations that really resonated in the female gaming community, because if you talk to any female gamer, you'll hear that kind of story. It's, you know, we don't like playing games online with other people. We don't like talking publicly about our love for video games because it kind of doesn't feel right to talk about our love for video games, because gaming is a boys thing. Even, you know, in the sense of young girls, there was one moment when I was teaching at a technology lounge, looking after kids and kind of teaching them how to play games and stream and things like that. And mum and her two children, a boy and a girl, came in to sign up for the class. And the boy was super excited. He just ran in, went straight to the Xbox and was playing games right away with all the other boys. The mum turned and asked, oh, would you like to, join your brother? I'll pay for you. And she just went, but there are no girls here. And that moment just broke my heart, because it was a school holidays. What else is she going to do other than, hang out with her mum for the rest of the day, or go to another holiday program, which wasn't maybe gaming related? And just hearing her just say that it was because there were no other girls there, that was the major kind of spark for me to really start looking at what we can do in the industry to help empower these girls to pursue what they love. Because I'm sure, like me, and like you yourself, there are many girls out there who love video games, who are passionate about video games, but don't necessarily want to talk about it. And so that's kind of where I, obviously as an Xbox fan, and I love everything Xbox, I thought, okay, well, I will put together a community group to try and get these women and girls and anyone really who feels like they are underrepresented or aren't really part of the gaming community to kind of come together and support one another.
Not only do you represent women in games, but also, the region of Australia and New Zealand, because I think typically when we talk about video games, it's countries like the USA or the UK that get a lot of media coverage, and I guess the culture of gaming largely looks at the culture within those areas. So I guess, as someone who works closely with Australia and New Zealand, and as an Australian myself, I would really love to hear your take, I guess, firstly on the Australian and New Zealand gaming scene, and if you think that the way women are supported in that environment is better or worse than, say, somewhere like the US and the UK, and if you think that there is much work being done to make sure those women are supported in Australia and New Zealand.
It's an interesting question, because obviously the US, the UK, and Europe in general, it's a larger market, and so I think it's easier to support female gamers there because there's so many of them. There's much more of them. They're more visible. And I think the resources are there to support these women by getting, maybe women in games initiatives. I know that there are big organizations based out of the US and Europe around empowering girls and empowering women who play games, like the Women in Games initiative. There's the Game Hers. There's all these different organizations in those regions. But in terms of Australia and New Zealand, I actually haven't really come across any one specific organization. I mean, there are small ones. There was the WOM ANZ that was created quite a while back. I haven't really seen all that much of it lately. Then there's also Empress Gaming, which is a new collective, mostly focused around empowering female gamers, but more on the esports side of things. And so there are small little, organizations popping up here and there to kind of help girls in our region and women in our region, but nothing on that similar scale to the US and Europe. And I think that it's really interesting because we have the brands here, we have the publishers, we have major companies all based in Australia and New Zealand who could really do a lot of good. I don't know, I feel like it's more on us over here to do something rather than on these organizations, these bigger organizations. A lot of these smaller groups that I was talking about has come about because someone in the community has realized that there's a gap and said, wait a minute, why aren't we doing something? So I think that there's a lot of room for improvement. I think that, it'll be nice to see, like, for example, Xbox do something really focused in our region for women. But therein lies the problem, because then you'll have the males going, oh, why can't we get something like this? We deserve it too. And they do, rightly so, they do, because they are gamers. But the problem here is we need more representation of women because there aren't enough of it. Whereas, when you think of gaming, you immediately think it's a boys thing. the marketing is a lot of males being shown in, the poster images, the ads. It's always a guy playing video games. It'll be nice to see more girls, more women, more people of color, especially in our region, because that's a whole nother conversation. People of color aren't very much the core focus in Australia and New Zealand. It's sad to say it's only always one demographic that is publicly pushed. And so a lot of my work deals with that as well. So women in color in particular is a big passion project for mine.
Yeah, and I would just sort of love to expand on something you just mentioned, which is looking at, I guess, the main demographic of gaming. And I've heard you sort of speak in previous interviews about how you yourself are very different to the typical mold that we see, that white male gamer that, like you said, is often on the covers of images and in ads. And yeah, I would love to really get your perspective on, as a woman of color and someone who really advocates for that, I guess, what things do you think need to change? Do you think that those bigger organizations do need to diversify not only, I guess, the types of people they're marketing towards, but even within themselves? Do they need to be hiring, I guess, an inclusive variety of people? And like you said, what can the gaming community do? What can gamers do?
Yeah, I think you covered all the points that I would normally make when it comes to what we can do. The bigger companies obviously have the resources to look at hiring a more diverse team, making sure that their team is representative of gamers, because everyone plays games. It's not really something that has a barrier to entry, other than maybe financially. But if you've got a diverse team in your leadership specifically, you can then work your way down. If you've got someone in senior management who's of a different ethnicity, from a different background, it just allows that kind of community feel within the organization, which then kind of trickles out, because you can tell when a company is really all about diversity and inclusion, because all their messaging, whether it's in press releases or in community activations on social media, it's all encompassing, rather than we're just focused on this one group and we just want to sell to this one group. So I think, having that kind of mix of people within an organization is really important, because you can also then get different perspectives when you're making decisions. You don't just have just one demographic in the room. You have the perspectives of all these different people from all walks of life. So I think that's really important. And then obviously with, in terms of the marketing and how messages are crafted, it's really important to be embracing everyone. I guess when you see those ads and you don't see yourself or anyone who looks like you kind of naturally think, as much as I'm going to play a game, I'm going to buy that game, it looks great, there's that subconscious level of thinking where you're like, but can I play this game? Can I talk about wanting to play this game? Because on screen I only see one type of person. So am I allowed? I know for me, growing up as a kid, looking at, obviously back in the 90s, it was a lot worse back in the 90s. I never saw a girl on screen playing games. And so, growing up, I was like, well, I feel weird talking about my passions because no one else like me talks about it. So likewise, now we are at that stage where we are changing those narratives, but a lot more needs to happen. And the best way to do that is making sure that what's being put out there is equates to who the community makeup is, I guess, who's in that community. Obviously, all gamers need to be represented so that everyone can feel like part of that whole community. And as gamers, as much as I would like to say, it'd be nice if everyone just accepted one another and just welcomed each other into the gaming community. I really don't know what one way would help. Obviously, it would be absolutely amazing if, as gamers, we embrace the idea that, hey, opening it up to more people and welcoming them in means everyone can play, which means gaming will be a bigger focus as an industry. More and more people playing games means, more opportunities to meet new people, more opportunities to do so much more in gaming. And so I think it's a mindset shift that needs to happen. And that can't be done unless you have the support from your gaming brands, the big organizations, top influencers talking about it, people like yourself doing podcasts like this to challenge that, stereotypical thinking. I think it's so important for these conversations to be happening almost on a daily basis.
Something I really like that you just mentioned then was this need for a mindset shift. I think that is something that is really important, and just my personal opinion is something that with the gaming community, it really does need to be sort of reconstructed from the ground up in terms of the culture. And I would love to sort of get your thoughts. It's a very sensitive topic to talk about, so I've got a sort of specific angle I want to approach this from. But as I'm sure you're aware, there's been a lot of news about the workplace of Blizzard in terms of any, sort of sexual misconduct or harassment, citing a really toxic workplace culture. But just particularly, something that I found really interesting was things like the frat boy culture and this rock star mentality, particularly because I think language like that really does showcase this sort of male-dominated idea of what the gaming culture is at the moment. So I'd love to sort of get your thoughts, I guess, on that idea of the male-dominated nature of the gaming community and industry, and also just, your thoughts on having these discussions about needing to change this sort of toxic workplace behavior in gaming.
It's really interesting when you think of it that way, because it's almost like that all boys mentality. It's like the boys club, like you mentioned, frat boys and rock stars. And I feel like gaming has advanced so much over the last decade at least, to the point where if you're working in games, you're not a celebrity. You're not this, a rock star. You're just a person doing a job, and you get to do something fun, yes, but it's still, just like everyone else. So I think that's the one thing that I find really interesting, where, sure, I'm an influencer. I get a lot of free stuff. I get things that, other people don't. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm a rock star and I'm better than anyone else, And I think, like you said, that's the kind of thinking that needs to change, because you're essentially serving the community when you work in games. At the end of the day, you are there to do a good job, to make sure that you put out the best possible game so that the masses can enjoy. It's nothing to do with you personally. Sure, I get a lot of satisfaction from what I do, and no doubt anyone who works in games would feel really good with what they do. They get to do a lot of fun stuff. But it really blows my mind that people think that they're better than anyone else just because they work in a particular industry that is hard to come by. Because it's not anymore, it's not hard to work in games anymore. There's so many different avenues. You don't just have to be a dev, or you don't just have to work in a publisher's company. You can do your own thing, like what I'm doing. So definitely that kind of choice of words needs to change. Obviously, like what you said is really true. From the ground up, people need to be looking at it as, hey, we're just human beings like everyone else. We're all here to do good work. We're all here to serve the community. What's the best way that we can kind of give to the community and give back to those people who are consuming our work and consuming our games? It's more of that give and take type mindset, as opposed to, I'm cool, I get to work in games, look at me, I've made the new GTA or whatever. And I think once everyone starts to think of it that way, where we're all the same, we're all here to do a good job, that's when I think people will kind of change that whole frat boy mentality. And it's like, we're the cool kids, and so this is a cool kids club, no girls allowed. Like, all of that is so old school thinking. It's very much, I'd like to think that we've all grown over the last decade to kind of see that as extremely toxic, and should be kept in the past. So I guess it's also a thinking of, hey, as we get older, we need to be wiser and not just stay in that one mindset for the rest of our lives. We need to constantly evolve, constantly change, and constantly improve. So yeah, I mean, I really am quite disappointed that people use that as their kind of, I don't know, feel good way of being part of the gaming community, because there are so many good things that you can do, and that should be enough. At least that's how I think anyway.
No, I love that. That's really fantastic and really compelling to hear. Like you said, there's hope that it can change. It's just making sure that people are supporting that change, which is fantastic. I'd like to sort of change it up because at the end of the day, we are talking about games as well. And I have heard you talk in previous interviews about how you actually haven't been playing that many games, but when you do, you like to play games that are compelling and have meaning. So I'd love to sort of get your thoughts on what those games look like. Are there any games that you think have some really positive messaging? What have been sort of your favorite games in the past couple of years?
That's obviously it's a very passionate point for me, because with anything that I love, there's always a deeper meaning to it, whether it's films, whether it's books, whether it's what I do day to day. I'm a very emotional person, so I like to have that emotional connection. And so I think with games, very recently, Flight Simulator was that one game for me that I found really helped with, just sitting back, de-stressing, relaxing, and not thinking about what's going on in the world currently, because it kind of takes you away a little bit when you get to travel to all these new countries and seeing, the world from your bedroom essentially, or your gaming room or living room. We're currently living in a world where we can't travel, so it's kind of nice to be able to travel virtually, and it kind of makes you think, oh wow, I mean, yes, I can't travel in person, but it's just so nice to kind of see the world still. And Flight Simulator is really good because the world looks exactly like it should be. It's so well detailed, and so if, say, you wanted to go and visit the pyramids, you can actually see the pyramids fairly up close. I mean, obviously you've got a bird's eye view, but you can see the pyramids. You can, go to the Great Wall of China. You can do all sorts of things. And so for me, that was really special. And the recent game that I've started discovering is Psychonauts 2. I've never played a Psychonauts game before. And I really didn't like the trailer when it was first released. I didn't think I would enjoy the game. I actually thought it was just like this, kiddie game that I wouldn't enjoy because it'd probably be too hard, and also the story wouldn't be compelling. I mean, I didn't expect the story to be compelling. And when I played it, it was just so amazing because the story was great, but it was what the game was trying to teach people and trying to teach the players about mental health and how you think and how you can change how you think. A lot of times, like people like me, I generally just automatically think a certain way. I don't stop to think about how I can change my thoughts and my perception. It's something that I just do automatically. But this game kind of stops you and it's like, hey, that negative thought you have, how about looking at it differently in this way, making this different mental connection, which could be more helpful. So it's been really good, especially, with lockdowns and things, to play this game and then realize like, oh, I mean, I'm thinking really negatively about the fact that I'm stuck in this room with four walls around me. Oh, but, I'm getting to play games more. I'm getting to interact with people online. I'm still able to have some social connections. So it's all about changing that perception. And I think that's such a powerful impact that Psychonauts 2 has, just reminding people that you don't just have to think a certain way. There are other ways to kind of see the world. And I absolutely love that. I think that's something so special that just shows that games aren't bad. A lot of people say, oh, games are violent and they're terrible for you, they're bad for your mental health. But hey, here's a game that shows that, gaming can be really good, can be really helpful, and it can actually make you feel happy.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to make, because I think, you could argue that of any entertainment field, that there's the good and the bad, but I think video games particularly get a bad rap in terms of, like you said, there's that preconceived idea of all games are violent and the messaging is horrible, but there are great games, like you said, Psychonauts 2, that can really be inclusive of other communities and can tell a really great sort of narrative and messaging. So I really love that you brought that up. And like I said, I love all the work you do in terms of inspiring women and women of color. And so I guess my sort of final question for you before we wrap up is, what's next for you? What are the goals in terms of bringing that conversation to the forefront? What would you like to see be done in the next couple years? Yeah, what are your plans moving forward?
Yeah, well, my immediate goal is to try and grow Women of Xbox a lot more. I'm currently, I guess, broadening the team so that it's not just myself and one other person running the community, trying to get a lot more support from brands, especially Xbox, to try and get some, I guess, staff members to talk about their career paths so that we can kind of inspire young girls to pursue careers in games. I would love to host, regular events and things like that, but obviously I'm just one person, so therefore I need, some help with that, which hopefully I'll get soon. On a personal level, I would be very much keen to work with brands a lot more. I'm pitching to work with multiple different brands to kind of have that representation, because you do see that there is a gap when it comes to Asians in particular in this region. So it'd be nice to kind of show that, hey, we exist. We are here. We would like to work with you. So, please, let's do some cool work together. And then, of course, I would absolutely love to just keep doing what I'm doing and talking to as many people as possible to just have these conversations, because I think it's so important, not just for me to share my experiences and my opinions, but for me to learn as well, because I think that there's so much knowledge out there in the world when it comes to different perspectives and different mindsets, and it'd be amazing to just have all the women in the gaming community just sharing their opinions and talking about what needs to happen. And hopefully, we can do some good collaborative work together and make the gaming space a much happier, nicer, and more peaceful space for everyone.
And thank you so much, Dhayana, for taking the time to chat with me. I love all the work you do, and I guess for anyone listening who wants to sort of follow what you do, are there any socials you want to plug, anywhere they can find you and hear about all your upcoming projects?
Well, I mean, I'm pretty much active all over, but most people can find what I'm up to on Twitter. You can just follow me at MissDeusGeek. Otherwise, I'm sure you'll see me somewhere talking about all of this.
Lovely. Well, thank you for chatting.
No, thank you so much for having me. I do realize I completely skipped your first question about how I got into games, but that's totally fine. I completely blanked and I just recalled that, so I was like, oh no.
Well, that's great. Did you want to share quickly how you got into games before we wrap this up?
Sure. I mean, it's really simple, really. I had 4 uncles. I grew up with four uncles, and they were gamers, and so I hung out with them a lot, and secretly when my mum wasn't looking, they would let me play those games. And yeah.
Perfect. Well, yeah, thank you so much for chatting to me again, and I look forward to seeing what you'll do in the future.
Thanks so much for having me, and I'm so glad that you're having these conversations.